Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Hello, and welcome to Louisiana Spotlight. I'm your host, Karen LeBlanc. Louisiana has faced its fair share of natural disasters, but the hurricanes of 2020 and 2021 left an indelible mark on our state. Hurricane Laura, a Category 4 storm, devastated southwest Louisiana in August 2020. Just over a year later, Hurricane Ida, another Category 4 storm, wreaked havoc on southeast Louisiana. Tonight, we'll explore the aftermath of these storms and examine how Louisiana has recovered in the years since. We'll look at the progress made in rebuilding homes and businesses and infrastructure, and we'll also discuss the challenges that remain, from ongoing housing shortages to economic recovery. And we'll examine how these storms have shaped Louisiana's approach to disaster preparedness and resilience. But first, we'll hear from one resident of Grand Isle who is doing all he can to restore the island after Hurricane Ida devastated it 3 years ago.
Well, the town took a beating for Ida. It really did. And one of the things that we're trying to preserve is this hotel, the Oleander, so that we can use it as like a community center, you know, a place for people to gather. This is the Oleander right here. My name is Ronnie Sampe. I'm the president of Restore Grand Isle and the Grand Isle Garden Club. I've been president of the Garden Club for 7 years, and I just started Restore Grand Isle 14 months ago. Well, some of the small projects is like the planting of oak trees to restore the oak forest on the island, which the island was famous for. We have a community garden where we can feed people that are on the island that are still suffering from the effects of Ida. We have a nursery that produces the oak trees that we're putting in the ground. And one of our large projects is the Oleander Hotel, which is right in the back of me. And we're looking to do that so that we can have a community center so that we can restore the island and the community. The last storm really hurt us. My big project with the Garden Club is we're replanting oak trees. The Grand Isle was really known for its oak forest, and for Ida, for Hurricane Ida, we lost 60% of our trees. So I have a project going on. To date, I have 235 trees in the ground that we put in since November of last year. And if you'll notice, the buildings that are in this oak forest are still here. So it's a buffer for the homes that we have here on Grand Isle for the hurricanes. There are homes on the island now that are over 100 years old, and they're built on the ground. And they still exist because of the oak trees being a barrier. So one of the projects that the Garden Club took on was to replace the trees that were taken from the hurricane. And it's going to take years and years to do it, but you got to start. And that's what we did. We started. And we have 230 oak trees planted in a year. One of the biggest problems we have is we've lost population. There's no place for people to live. And if you got to go by the FEMA regs, then they can't afford the home. And if they can afford the home, they can't afford the insurance. So we lost our population, our native population. The thing is, we have no local residents anymore. We have lost half or more of the people who lived over here, and That causes us to have a problem with labor and the workers to be able to work in the restaurants, supermarkets, hardware stores, and to be able to at least service the community. We don't have that anymore. If we can get our government to assist us in setting up housing, we're working on a project now called workforce housing. If you can get a job here on Grand Isle, then you will be eligible for housing. And we're thinking that if we can do it that way, we can bring back the community and the people who were living here before the hurricane. We need residents, and that's what our goal is to try to build the community back with residents.
And along this road to recovery, to help us better understand the current state of affairs, I'm joined by expert Jacqu Tibido. He is the director of the Governor's Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness, also known as GOSEP. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, so we just heard from Ronnie Sampay about what's going on in Grand Isle. What's going on with the coastal communities as a whole in terms of recovery from these two hurricanes?
Well, the first thing is when you look at this story, it just talks to the resiliency of the Louisiana people. I've grown up in Lafourche Parish my whole life. I've gone to Grand Isle the whole time there. And what he's talking about is a real world situation that we're all faced with on recovering from the 2020 and 2021 storms of Laura, Delta, Zeta, and Ida, and housing becomes a real issue.
He brought up a really interesting solution, which is perhaps the government investing or assisting with worker housing to bring people back to these communities, bring the workers back to rebuild.
Everything that you do must start at the local community. So he's right on point. Whatever we can do economically to help Grand Isle and the residents and the people there, we have to do. And it all starts with that local element and a commitment from the resources just to make things better.
So where are we in terms of the recovery process? The state as a whole, I mean, Grand Isle wasn't the only coastal community or area hit by Laura and Ida. What kind of progress have we made?
Well, if you look at where we are, the storms themselves were significant. First off, when you look at Hurricane Laura, it caused, to date, about $16 billion in damage. And then we have Hurricane Ida, just because of the nature of the wind, has caused $22 billion in damage. So our recovery as we go through that, GOSEP's primary job is to move those federal resources, mainly dollars, to all the parishes and all the municipalities that are out there to make things better for the people. So we've been in it now for 4 years, and we're going to continue to be in this until we get everyone through.
What are some of the biggest challenges that the state has faced in the recovery process?
Well, the hardest aspect of it is when you're talking about what happens with recovery, it's a long-term thing. You look at the emergency management cycle, starts with prepare, then goes to respond, and then you recover and mitigate and prevent. So you look at some of the elements. We're still recovering from Hurricane Katrina and Rita and Gustav and Ike, and it just gets exacerbated when you wind up having Laura, Delta, Zeta, and in a Hurricane Ida. When you get the devastation of your electrical grid and your infrastructure, that's the real challenge. When you have no electricity, you have no natural gas, you have no water, you have no sewer, and it becomes a very difficult recovery process.
So to circle back to what Ronnie said, definitely restoring the infrastructure is very important. Also restoring the population, and that goes back to housing. And what he said is a struggle statewide, and that is if you can afford to build to FEMA specs, great. Maybe you can afford the house, but you can't afford the insurance because of where you live in these hurricane zones, so to speak. How do we fix this? This is fundamental. We can restore infrastructure all we want, but if we can't create a situation where people can afford to live in these communities.
Well, I think it comes back to you look at what we're facing right now, particularly after Hurricane Ida, is the insurance crisis. On what we had, where we had insurance companies go default, we have situations where you're trying to do a recovery, and FEMA always asks the homeowner start with an insurance at first. Well, if you have no insurance, and then maybe you haven't done a succession on a house that's passed through multi-generations, that becomes a challenge. It's GOSEP's job to break down those barriers and continuing to push for the residents and bring in FEMA money in the form form of recovery dollars. And we also transition it to a housing process where we have the long-term recovery subcommittee that we manage with the Office of Community Development in Louisiana directly for housing. And it all starts with and ends with providing a place for the people that live here to come back to and to live.
The recovery effort is closely tied to the pace at which the FEMA dollars come in.
Right.
And we hear time and time again that pace is so slow. Is there anything that the state can do to expedite or assist in that?
There is, and we have. One of the things that we identified as a critical issue when we came into GOSEP on January 8th with Governor Landry is we identified that GOSEP had an internal policy on recovery that when you went through all of a parish or a municipality went through all of their FEMA documentation, and it took about 22 months and they received an obligation, GOSEP would basically pay 80% of that obligation, and then what occurred is the remaining 20% would be facilitated once all the requirements were met. We came in and made an administrative change and moved that to 90%. So what that did was that freed up $300 million in FEMA money that was sitting at GOSEP. It was 150 different agencies, and as critical as that was, it's a win for the parishes, but it's really a win for the people. And the next time we have a major storm and you have $100 million in damages or $1 billion in damages and you're paying 90% up front instead of 80%, it's a huge win for the parishes that are there.
Absolutely. Well, the speed of recovery aid is always under scrutiny. And we spoke with Grand Isle Mayor David Carmidel about the slow pace at which recovery aid is being released. Take a look at this.
I'm proud to tell you that, we got construction going on, and I try to explain to the people, it takes you about 18 months to 24 months to get your money from your federal government. And when you belong to Jefferson Parish, you try to get money from them, and then they send it to you, or you get it from the state first, it comes to the parish, then us. And that's a slow process too. So it's just a lot of, like waiting on tearing up them houses, waiting on some federal money, for drainage. Then you got to go to survey everything, we did everything right. How much pipe we talking about? It's studies and looking at it, And by the time you get it fixed, there's another hurricane.
And as the mayor said, by the time you get it fixed, there's another hurricane. And therein lies part of the frustration for everyone, including your job. So let's talk a little bit about this coordination between all agencies. We touched on it, but what more can we do?
Well, you can always do more. And one of the things that we're trying to do here at GOSEP with it, it's a little bit different mindset. I spent 31 years in the Louisiana National Guard. I spent a lot of nights down there with Mayor Carmidel. And what we're trying to do is more of a regional concept where we can focus more on the coordination at the local level first, and then the parish level, and then state agencies. We do it, we rehearse all the time, and we practice all the time, and we've just got to continuously get better. In emergency management, you really have just 3 missions, and you've got to be able to save lives, protect the property, and maintain infrastructure. So we've got to have that ability to do all 3 of those as quickly as we can and really move federal resources to the hands of the local governments.
So there are critics out there that say, why rebuild in areas historically are going to get hit again by another hurricane? It seems to be a fool's errand to reinvest in communities that are certainly going to face another hurricane. What do you say to that as a state agency? Does it feel sometimes like a fool's errand?
No, not at all. It's what we do. Okay, Louisiana is a resilient people. And we live through hurricanes all the time. The people that may not be from here just don't understand that. We don't give up, and we don't give up on each other. It's what we do. It's based on our resilience. Sometimes is it nerve-wracking to me to see people not evacuate? Of course it is. But their strength is what is so empowering, and they always come back.
There's been a big conversation about resilient housing and shoring up our housing stock as a possible solution. What can the state do to assist in creating a more resilient housing stock?
There's already programs that are out there. We basically lock in $450 million a year after every disaster in FEMA hazard mitigation money to raise houses, to make 911 centers more resilient, to harden sheriff's offices with generators. We're already doing it. It's not near enough. We need as much federal help as we can, and we need to protect our coast.
Well, one of the most pressing issues in the aftermath of these storms has been housing. Of course, it's what we've been talking about. Now, we're going to hear from Mayor Carmidel again about the ongoing housing challenges that his constituents face.
What I'm focusing on is, in my heart right now, that I'm really working hard on, is to build workforce housing. Right here behind the church, talking to Father Mark, right behind here, there's some property available that we're looking at that we think we could put some nice little homes in there. And that means you wake up in the morning, you can put your kid going to school. Daddy's going to work, mama's going to work. Workforce housing. I want to get my young couples back. They want to come back home.
In your opinion, based on what you've seen, what have been the most effective strategies in the housing shortage and tackling this?
Well, the housing shortage basically it starts with the sheltering process. We have the sheltering process that's an emergency management function. We do that pre-storm in what's called congregate sheltering, schools and community centers. And then after a storm, it migrates to what's called a FEMA non-congregate housing, where we use travel trailers, hotels, and then it migrates to a longer strategy that HUD uses called the Rapid Housing Program through the Office of Community Development, and it transitions sheltering to housing. It's always a challenge. You can never do enough, and it's one of the areas that's always a key element of our strategy at GOSEP.
So we've talked about what happens in terms of personal responsibility, the state level, the federal level, but there's Mother Nature and there's climate change. And certainly climate change plays a role in our vulnerability along the coast and throughout Louisiana in general when we talk about wind and hurricanes. What are we doing at the state level to address the threat of climate change as it relates to all of our vulnerability?
Right. Well, the first thing that I tell everyone is you can never beat Mother Nature. The best you could do is fight to a draw, and you just can't win against her. So what we do is, what really emergency managers we're being faced with is what's called rapid intensification, where we're seeing in the course of the last 72 hours, storms really that may not in the past have developed in anything into major storms. And what it forces us to do is compress our timeline, and we have to now plan on when storms are off the coast of the Africa, and then as well as east side of the Caribbean. So the Hurricane Debbie, we tracked for 6 days before it entered into the Caribbean. The systems that are out there now, we're tracking now because of this rapid intensification. That's the impact to the emergency managers.
All right, well, final thoughts before we wrap up our interview we're in the midst of hurricane season, more hurricanes bound to be in our future. Final thoughts.
To all the Louisiana people out there, stay strong, and we got you back.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise and insight.
Thank you very much.
We now want to switch our focus to southwest Louisiana and the recovery process in Lake Charles following Hurricane Laura in 2020. LPB sat down with Mayor Nick Hunter a year after Laura to see how the city was recovering. Here's some of what he had to say back then.
After a year, I will say that I would have hoped to have had more support from our federal government. And it took me a while to get there before I wanted to say that publicly, because I don't want to come across as whining, or I don't want to come across as a community that simply has their hat in their hand going to DC and saying, hey, fix this for us. Other communities have received supplemental federal disaster aid days, weeks after one singular event. I'll go back to Hurricane Katrina, and by the way, they needed it, and I'm glad they got it. 10 days after Hurricane Katrina, Washington, D.C. acted with federal supplemental disaster aid. It happened 30 days after Hurricane Andrew, happened 90 days after Superstorm Sandy. Here we sit, having gone through 4 federally declared natural disasters, more than any other city in American history. 365 days later, and we do not have a penny of supplemental disaster aid. The Road Home program happened after Hurricane Katrina. Over $9 billion was funneled through HUD to help reestablish people in sustainable, healthy housing. After the 2016 Baton Rouge floods, the Restore program filtered down $650 million for the same purpose? Zero, zilch, nada, after what we've been through for a program similar to Road Home or Restore. We are an extremely self-reliant population, and we help each other, and we reach across the aisle and across neighborhoods, and there's a lot of self-sufficiency in this community. But I am not bashful about saying it. I'm not too proud to say that there are some neighborhoods in this city that look like Hurricane Laura hit yesterday. And that's going to take more than just local government and nonprofits and churches to fix.
We are fortunate to have Mayor Hunter with us again via Skype to update us on the city's progress. So, Mayor, thank you for joining us again. Let's start with the supplemental disaster aid that you spoke of a few years back. Whatever happened? Did we get it? How long did it take?
We did receive it. And look, as much as I have been brutally honest in talking about my disappointment with the timeline, I believe you got to call a spade a spade. And so as we sit here close to 4 years post Hurricane Laura, I am thankful, and I feel like I've almost got like my third wind through this whole experience. There's still a lot of strides that need to be made in this community, but I truly feel like we finally got a commensurate and equitable response from the federal government. And I just watched a video that you had an interview with me from a couple years ago, and my God, it seems like night and day from where we were a couple years ago to where we are today. So the answer is yes, we finally got the federal response we were looking for.
So bring us up to date. Give us a progress report on recovery efforts. Where do we stand now?
The city of Lake Charles, if you made me put a percentage on it, I would say that this city is probably 85% recovered from Hurricane Laura. And throughout this community, thanks to the supplemental disaster aid, the state formed the Restore program, kind of a 2.0 program that originally started with the 2016 floods. To that program, hundreds of millions of dollars of housing recovery has hit the streets throughout Southwest Louisiana. In the city of Lake Charles alone, over 500 single-family homes have either been completely rebuilt or repaired thanks to federal funds. We have other projects that are underway, some focused on economic development, some focused on infrastructure. We have had enormous investment into our infrastructure, specifically drainage. And as we sit here today, I can confidently tell you our drainage situation in Lake Charles is far better than it was pre-Hurricane Laura. I could not have said that 2 years ago.
So having said all of that, has the recovery effort created new economic opportunities? And if so, tell us a little bit about that.
It has, and I'm still very cautious in the same breath that I talk about the silver linings from the storm. I also want to acknowledge that there's still some people out there suffering from Hurricane Laura. 4 years ago might seem like a long time, but for what we went through in 2020 and 2021, those were life-changing events that take sometimes longer than 4 years to recover from. That being said, we have had multiple opportunities for the city of Lake Charles in the aftermath of Hurricane Laura. I'll talk about housing just for one. To have economic development, you got to have people that are back living in Lake Charles. By the end of this calendar year, we will have the most resilient city in the state of Louisiana from a housing perspective, because all of the housing that has been rebuilt, thanks to tax credits and other additional federal help, is attached to the fortified gold standards, meaning that these construction methods will withstand another Hurricane Laura type of event. So per capita for the state of Louisiana, the city of Lake Charles can say we have the most resilient housing of any city in the state of Louisiana.
So let's talk about the most significant challenges that lie ahead. What work is left to be done?
There's still a lot of blue tarps inside the city of Lake Charles, and we have to bombard this community with every available resource that we can find. But when you look at where we are today, versus 2 years ago, oh my God, it's almost miraculous. And I give the lion's share of the credit to this community. The people here in Southwest Louisiana, the people here in Lake Charles are salt of the earth. Yes, the money from the federal government helped. However, the people here in Lake Charles really deserve the lion's share of the credit for the recovery story that we've experienced.
Well, as you said in an earlier interview, the people of Lake Charles are resilient and self-reliant, and that quality went a long way in the recovery effort. I'm afraid we've run out of time for our discussion tonight, but I want to thank Mayor Hunter and Mr. Tibido for sharing their insights on this subject. So what do you, our viewers, think? We encourage you to comment on tonight's show by visiting lpb.org/Louisiana Spotlight and clicking on the Join the Conversation link. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.